to me that the short-termism of Trump thinking is not going to work again. I mean, I assume so. I don't know if you would agree. What would work in your opinion?
Well, I think we can't give Trump all the credit when there was a ceasefire, and you can't blame him for the conflict, to be clear. This has really, really deep roots. I think the US centralized play, not least because Thailand is the US, have a million population, has to be great to play. But the economic and military power that putting around the US does give it some international credibility. But I think what we need is both sides at a political level if we want to de-escalate, right? It's only at that point that you can then have some sort of mediation to work out the terms of immediate de-escalation and then have start to talk about the long-term consequences. But the fact is, up to now, both sides have kept this conflict within certain limits. It's obviously now more intense and a few months ago, but both sides are still keeping this within certain limits for their own political interests. So ultimately, the leaderships in both places have to want to step back. Cambodia has done unfair by if they're really dissatisfied with what's going on. I think that will, to some extent, filter through, especially in Thailand, where there will be elections for sure by February.
Ben, we've been talking a bit on the programme about social media, and I know this is a conflict that's rooted in a long history, but what role, if any, is social media playing in amplifying some of that animosity and entrenching views in both countries?
Well, it's a really good point, Dan. It comes back to this, the old truism about the first casualty of war being true. And we see that. I mean, it's quite interesting when the Thai or the Cambodian authorities are updating diplomats or the media and press conferences and updates. They have their hashtags all over their press statements, Thailand, Cambodia's hot, etc. I mean, on one level, it's quite childish, really. But obviously, it does matter the story that you tell. But to be honest, I think the social media campaign is mostly from these leaderships to their own people. I think it's going to be quite hard to convince others of the rightness or wrongness because this is such a complicated and long-standing dispute. But I think the primary objective is, for the leaders of Thailand and Cambodia respectively to tell their people we're in the right way to protect our sovereignty. The other guys started it. That's really their focus. And populations in both countries are already active. The internet in Cambodia, because it is a one-party state, is much more tightly controlled. There's certain restrictions in Cambodia, in Thailand. Cambodia is much more restricted. So it's not just a combination of the PR and the social media management in the way that we would think about it, but it's also a question of control of the internet and the sources of information.
A final thought from me. We've heard about the United States' role. We touched upon Malaysia's role back in July. Where is China in all of this as a relatively near neighbour?
That's a fascinating question. It's a neighbour. It also has very, very good relationships. It's probably one of the closest partners to both Thailand and Cambodia. So you may have expected that, given that the Chinese leadership, China's president Xi Jinping has stated that China wants to play a much bigger role in global security, that China would be there on the ground and both sides would come to the table. But they've been very, very, very cautious. I think they don't want to end up with egg on their face. They don't want to be embarrassed by coming in and saying we're going to bring peace and then peace not happen. And I think that's because they can sense this conflict is going to run and run, and they're just not willing to take much risks in the first place. But secondly, I think their estimation would probably be like this is not resolvable for now. And I think if the conflict were to escalate further and it were to start to impact Chinese business interests, which are extensive in both countries, I think that's when you see Beijing start to bring its pressure to bear.
Ben, very grateful to you. Thank you very much, Ben Blatt of Chatham House. Now, we don't often cover geology on this programme, the branch of natural science concerned with the composition of the Earth, basically rocks and the minerals that are found on this planet's surface and below. But we are going to for the next few moments because our science specialist, Roland Pease, has travelled to New Orleans in the United States for the annual gathering of the American Geophysical Union, or AGU. That's the world's leading association of geologists and geophysicists. And this is the main meeting. Each year, about 30,000 delegates expected to convene from more than 100 countries around the world. Well, I spoke to Roland a little earlier, shortly after he arrived in New Orleans, and he told me why that gathering is regarded so highly among Earth scientists.
It is really the big meeting globally and there will be people here from across the whole planet gathering here. For so many decades now, it's been the place where earth scientists of every shade have brought their latest results. So there'll be people talking about earthquakes, of course, and things like volcanoes, the things you might expect. Global warming, there's going to be any number of sessions talking about what's going on with the climate, but also the sun, because what the sun does impacts the upper part of our atmosphere. The solar Earth connection that they talk about, asteroids, planets. There's even going to be talking about telescopes looking for planets around other stars. So they're a greedy lot, actually, if you ask me, these Earth scientists. They want it all.
Is this the sort of gathering which arrives at conclusions about anything, or is it more a sort of a discussion for those who are experts in their field?
Mostly it's where people have got something incredibly new that they want to share. So you'll get stuff that's reported here in brief form, often before it gets into the scientific journals and so on, which is one reason I love to come to these sessions. You hear things that are absolutely fresh off the press, as it were, you know. And also they will be discussing things which have just been happening over the past year. The extraordinary earthquake, fortunately, didn't kill too many people in Myanmar earlier this year. It's the kind of thing where they want to come and compare notes, because they've all got their different takes on this. So you go into these sessions, there will be sort of 10-minute talks, one after another, and then they start quizzing each other and saying, are you absolutely sure about that? And well, what we found was something else. And so it's a very dynamic sort of feel when you come here, and there's always a tremendous buzz in the corridors before and after these sessions.
It's in New Orleans, and what happened in New Orleans back in 2005, namely the impact of Hurricane Katrina, that is being looked at, isn't it, at some point during the gathering?
It is. They're actually taking a lot of scientists out to some of the key places to, sort of share the knowledge and so on. That hurricane was, I think, such a wake-up call for the United States, and it sort of made people realize, I think, how important global warming could be. And 20 years on, I think, to go back and look at the lessons that they've learned and how much smarter they've got at, for example, forecasting, which is so much better now in terms of giving people days' notice of big events coming up. But that one is etched a mark in climate history, really, for the United States.
And you mentioned the broader climate picture. I mean, does that inevitably dominate a gathering like this these days?
It has to, because everything else is affected by it. So, there will be sessions on droughts, there'll be sessions on floods, there are definitely sessions on wildfires. I've been to some of these sessions in previous years. There are just so many wildfires these days. The pollution that these wildfires put out. There's sessions on melting of the ice at Antarctica. There's another session on the state of the Arctic. In a sense, it's such a dominating theme, even though there will be people talking, as I say, about earthquakes and volcanoes and things which are always being talked about. It's bigger and bigger, and the number of people involved in this kind of science now, particularly with satellites who are observing the Earth from outer space and doing the measurements from out there, it's inevitably huge, and of course it's where a lot of the more general public interest is generated as well.
Roland Pease speaking to me from New Orleans. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. A reminder of some of our other main headlines. The United Nations is warning that Israeli settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank has hit the highest levels since records began. And China has been marking the anniversary of a notorious 1930s massacre by invading Japanese troops against a backdrop of current tensions between the two powers. And we go to Japan now, but for something very different. One small cafe has become famous for far more than its cakes and its coffee. At Tokyo's Orange Day Cafe, muddled orders, long pauses and gentle confusion are not mistakes. They're very much the point. The monthly pop-up was created to give people living with dementia a place to volunteer, and one of its best-known helpers is Toshio Morita, an octogenarian living with dementia who's become something of a local celebrity. Our correspondent Shana Khalil went to meet him and to see how a simple cup of coffee can turn into an act of community.
Once a month, this small cafe in Sengawa, Western Tokyo turns into something different. There's still delicious cakes, coffee, and tea, of course, but the mood and the purpose of this place change.
My name, Morita Toshio. どうぞよろしく。
87-year-old Morita-san has been living with dementia for years. He's one of the volunteers at the Orange Day Cafe, or the Cafe of Mistaken Orders, as it's now famously known. Morita-san welcomes customers wearing an orange apron, a black and white headband, and a charming smile. This monthly pop-up gives people with dementia a chance to volunteer and connect with the community for a few hours. You can see just how much Morita-san enjoys it.
やっぱりお客さんがたくさん来てね。
It's fun, right? Here, when there are many customers. I'm excited when I see people enjoying their drinks and when they start chatting to me.
Mix-ups can happen, of course, but it's all part of the experience and all taken in good humor. Morita-san is supported by another younger volunteer. The menus and tables have been color-coded to make it easier for the elderly waiters to take the orders.
We have 6 tables here, so we put the 6 colors of the flowers on each table. And
Akiko Kanna is the founder of the pop-up cafe.
starting with my father got dementia, I think it was 5 years ago, and he couldn't renew his driving license. He was so shocked about that, but he was trying to get something, something to work. He tried to get work.
One of Akiko's friends mentioned the cafe idea, but the initiative was delayed because of the COVID pandemic. By the time it took off, her father's dementia got worse, and he couldn't take part. Still, Akiko tells me, this has been a gratifying experience for her and the elderly volunteers.
People want to draw a line, person who is not disabled and able. I don't like that. And everybody needs a place to be needed. I think they need identity. They need a place. They need a place to be himself or herself. I didn't want my dad